Welcome back. My name is Ken Thompson, and I'm a lay member of the Marshfield United Methodist Church. This is episode 2 of the Easter Women. God chose to reveal the resurrection of Jesus from the dead first to women on Easter morning, and instructed these women to be the first apostles of the good news. Even if not believed initially, or even today, the Easter women spoke the truth. I have seen the Lord, he is risen. In episode 1, we talked about the 4 Gospels containing different facts about the details of that first Easter morning, some women being present in one Gospel or admitted in another. Then, skipping Mary Magdalene, we tried to unravel the identities of the other women who were recorded in the Bible as having been present at the crucifixion, the burial, and the resurrection of Jesus. In this episode, I would like to talk about Mary Magdalene, who is described as being present at the crucifixion, the burial, and the first witness to the resurrection in all 4 Gospels. She is the Easter woman extraordinaire. What does the Bible tell us about Mary Magdalene? The Gospel of Mark first mentions Mary Magdalene at the crucifixion, naming her as one of the women who had come with Jesus from Galilee to Jerusalem, following him and caring for his needs, listing her as a witness to the placing of the body of Jesus in the tomb and being present at the resurrection. Mark seems to leave all of the women who witnessed the resurrection silent. But the longer edition of the Gospel of Mark, which contains verses not found in the earliest manuscripts, describes Mary Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had been driven out by Jesus, as the first person to witness the resurrected Christ, naming her as the one who informed the mourning and weeping disciples of the good news of the resurrection of Jesus. The Gospel of Matthew, echoing Mark, reports Mary Magdalene as present at the crucifixion, the burial, and the resurrection of Jesus, and among the women who brought the good news to the other disciples. The Gospel of Luke introduces us to Mary Magdalene in chapter 8 as among the women who had been cured of evil spirits and diseases, who traveled with Jesus and the 12 male disciples throughout Galilee early in his ministry, and who helped finance and manage the mission with their own resources. The author of Luke describes her as a woman from whom 7 demons had come out. He also asserts that Mary Magdalene was present at the first discovery of the resurrection and as among those women who announced the resurrection to the other disciples. Now, let's take a few minutes to read about the resurrection of Jesus as given to us in the Gospel of John, which most scholars believe was the last of the 4 Gospels written, probably in the 90s of the Christian era. To set the scene, early on Sunday morning, before the sun had come up, Mary Magdalene goes to the tomb where the body of Jesus had been laid, finds it empty, and runs back to tell Peter and John that the body has been removed. The 2 disciples sprint to the tomb and discover it empty except for the burial clothes. We are told that the 2 men did not understand that Jesus had to rise from the dead. Picking up at verse 10, chapter 20, this is the NIV translation. Then the disciples went back to their homes, but Mary stood outside the tomb crying. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb and saw 2 angels in white seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. They asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" "They have taken my Lord away," she said, "and I don't know where they have put him." At this she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not realize that it was Jesus. "Woman," he said, "why are you crying? Who is it you are looking for?" Thinking that he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." And Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned toward him and cried out in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said, "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet returned to my Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I am returning to my Father and your Father, to my God and to your God." Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, "I have seen the Lord," and she told them he had said these things to her. From this point on, the Bible is silent about Mary Magdalene. So let's spend a few moments talking about what the Bible doesn't say about her. While we are told that she was cured of 7 demons, we are not informed how those demons manifested themselves. In first-century Judaism, disease and illness were often attributed to evil spirits or demons, especially illness, physical, mental, or psychological, which could not be cured by the primitive medicine of the day. The number 7, I have read, in traditional Jewish numerology was symbolic of completeness, or as full as possible, indicating that Mary's condition was totally or completely disabling, and that the healing was completely, totally successful. There is nothing in the Bible to indicate that Mary Magdalene's disability involved any kind of moral depravity, not even the slightest suggestion of any sexual sinfulness. From the information in the Bible, we can infer that Mary came from a small resort town on the Sea of Galilee, that she was possessed of some assets of value from which she helped fund the ministry of Jesus, and that after she was healed by Jesus from an all-consuming illness, she dedicated her life completely to following Jesus. In apocryphal writings of the first 3 centuries of the Christian Church, that is, writings which were not included in the New Testament, Mary Magdalene figures quite prominently. She is depicted as one of Jesus' closest companions, asking Jesus many questions, often understanding the words of Jesus when others didn't, so much so that some of the disciples were jealous of her relationship with Jesus. In none of these writings is there any indication that Mary Magdalene was an immoral woman, past or present, or that her relationship with Jesus was inappropriate. Her renown was because she was an early leader among the followers of Jesus and a financial supporter of his ministry. The most frequent sobriquet associated with her, one of the greatest respect, was Apostle to the Apostles, because she was the first to bring the good news of the resurrection to the men who would later be described as apostles. For 300 years, Mary Magdalene was regarded in most of the Christian churches as a saint because of her leadership, her support of Jesus and his followers, and because she was the apostle to the apostles. Then there began to develop an undercurrent of misogynistic speculation, insinuations that Mary Magdalene should more accurately be known as a symbol of penitence, an example of the forgiveness of Jesus, instead of a leader among his followers. Men in the church, without a scintilla of evidence, began conflating Mary Magdalene with the woman described in Luke chapter 7, who anointed the feet of Jesus with expensive ointment and wiped them dry with her unbraided hair. The sins of this woman were implied to be from prostitution, although Luke only describes her as sinful. Then, to complicate the matter, the church fathers began to suggest that Mary of Bethany, the sister of Martha and Lazarus, and the woman of Luke 7 were one and the same person, which then made Mary Magdalene a composite of the woman from Luke 7 and Mary of Bethany, and that her 7 demons became sexual in nature. Again, no evidence in the Bible. Regardless, Pope Gregory I, known as the Great, in a series of sermons in 591 of the Christian era, which were tellingly addressed to the brothers, pontificated that Mary Magdalene, the woman of Luke chapter 7, and Mary of Bethany are one and the same person. He didn't stop there. He decreed that the 7 demons which Jesus removed from Mary Magdalene were actually all of the medieval 7 deadly sins, saying she turned the mass of her crimes to virtues in order to serve God entirely in penance. Mary Magdalene, and by extension all women, was reduced to repentant sinner because of her sexuality, instead of obedient follower and supporter of Jesus, instead of leader of the Christian church, and instead of being the apostle to the apostles. This papal pronouncement was not accepted everywhere. The Eastern Orthodox Church never accepted such a characterization of Mary Magdalene, always regarding her as a virtuous woman, nor did the Benedictine order of the Roman Catholic Church. But the majority in the Western Church, from the Muslim invasion of Europe and the Crusades, from the Protestant Reformation to the Catholic Counter-Reformation, from the Renaissance to the Enlightenment, from wars of independence to civil rights movements, all believed that 6th century slander, that Mary Magdalene overcame a salaciously unseemly past inherent in the sexuality of all women through the forgiveness of Jesus. She was a clear warning to men of the dangers of the sexual nature of women, and an example to women that their path to discipleship was not through leadership and learning like the men, but through penance. Forgotten during these centuries was evidence of how Jesus welcomed women into his inner circle, allowing them to ask questions at his feet. How Paul accepted women as his equal partners in founding and caring for the newborn Christian fellowships, and how on Easter morning it was the women who first witnessed the resurrection of Jesus and spread the good news of the resurrection to the male disciples, and how it was a woman who had become known as the apostle to the apostles. But as Dr. Martin Luther King said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. Despite some intransigence in some denominations, and despite some wild, evidence-less theories in popular novels and movies, the Universal Church, as it wrestles with the place of women in the organization, has at least begun to polish the reputation of Mary Magdalene. In 1969, Pope Paul VI separated the women so that the sinful woman of Luke 7 was not Mary Magdalene, and so that Mary of Bethany was not the same person as Mary Magdalene. This tacitly at least admitted that Pope Gregory I and the teaching of the Church had been in error. In 1988, the Roman Catholic Church joined the position that the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Protestant churches of John Calvin had always maintained, that Mary Magdalene was a virtuous woman. Pope John Paul II wrote in 1988, "The women are the first at the tomb. They are the first to find it empty. They are the first to hear, 'He is not here, he has risen,' as he said. They are the first to embrace his feet. The women are the first to be called to announce this truth to the apostles." The Gospel of John emphasizes the special role of Mary Magdalene. She is the first to meet the risen Christ. Hence she came to be called the apostle to the apostles. Mary Magdalene was the first eyewitness of the risen Christ, and for this reason she was the first to bear witness to him before the apostles. This event, in a sense, crowns all that has been said previously about Christ entrusting divine truths to women as well as to men. That's all Pope John Paul II said. But many churches have moved from Pope John Paul II's understanding that God entrusts divine truths to women to believing that God also entrusts women with positions of leadership, preaching, administering, teachers, and determining orthodoxy. As Dr. King said, that arc is long, but it's bending toward justice. No longer will Mary Magdalene be justification for denying women within the church the full expression of their God-given talents. When I look at Mary Magdalene as depicted in the Bible, not polished or tarnished by 2,000 years of Christian history, I see a human being. I see a woman who answered the call of her Savior through obedience. Yes, she was the first to witness the resurrection of Jesus. But when I reflect upon what kind of example she sets for me in my life, I see a person, a human being, experiencing the most exultant joy of her life, wanting nothing but to cling to her resurrected Savior and worship at his feet. How deeply conflicted she must have been when Jesus directed her to leave him and tell the others of his resurrection. Now, I believe that Mary Magdalene loved those other followers and would have wanted them to be as joyful as she was. But still, She had just found her Savior gloriously alive, and she was being told to go away and tell others of that glory. Despite her reluctance, she chose to obey Jesus. She ran to tell the others the good news. Sometimes I find it's so comfortable to be in the presence of God, in worship, in study, in prayer, but I don't want to hear Jesus telling me to go out and tell others that he is alive, to follow the example of Mary Magdalene, to share the good news, to spread the joy. I wonder if I have the courage of the Easter women. Will I obey Jesus? Will I? Will you? Happy Easter. He is risen.